Welcome to the Operations Science Podcast, where the art and science of operational excellence come to life through captivating stories of triumph, challenge, and transformation from the front lines of industry. Our distinguished guests, from manufacturing pioneers and medical device innovators to aerospace visionaries, diagnostic lab leaders, and major capital project leaders, unveil the hidden patterns and powerful insights that drive exceptional results in the complex world of operations. Join us on this journey of discovery as we explore the brilliant minds behind the systems that make our world work and uncover the leadership secrets that could revolutionize your approach to operations forever. Here is your host, Ed Pound.
Welcome to the Operations Science Podcast. Today's guest has spent nearly 25 years helping organizations turn big change into real, measurable delivery. From building in-house delivery capabilities to modernizing supply chains and financial services, she specializes in leading transformations where the technology backbone is as important as the people side. And when COVID forced the world to move faster than planned, she was right in the middle of accelerating paper-based processes into digital operations so business could keep moving. Joining us from the UK, where she starts the day with a run and a podcast, please welcome to the podcast, Marta Moreira. Hey, Marta, how are you?
Hello, Ed. Hi, I'm fine. Thank you. Hello to everyone.
Thanks for joining us. Hope you're getting to see a little bit of spring weather over there in the UK.
It's getting there. It's getting there. Thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure. All right, let's jump right in. You've been in change in projects arenas for almost 25 years. What problem are you solving in your current role now, and why does it matter to the business you're working with?
So at the moment, the world, as you know, is so complicated. We are definitely in a VUCA world, with the volatile economies, volatile change, etc. So at the moment, I'm helping organizations understand what change they need to prioritize, understanding the business value of that change, and really driving that change forward so that the companies get the maximum out of the value, or the maximum value, should we say, out of the change. So really focusing on business value, really focusing on unlocking that value, and really focusing on maximizing the investment in change.
So for a particular project that you might be working on now, or you worked on recently, does that mean implementing a new ERP system, a new financial planning system? What specifically kind of change are you talking about?
So at the moment, I'm helping the organization in two fronts. One is the business side, so looking at processes, how to optimize processes. So we've got a myriad of different systems. Some are legacy systems, some are systems that were homeborn or heavily customized. So we've got a system, for example, it's an ERP system, which is based in SAP, which we've recently upgraded to SAP HANA. So I'm helping the organization at the moment look at all of that myriad of systems and really looking at what do we need, how do we use them, are we optimizing the effectiveness of all of the processes that we have in there, are we as compliant as we can be? Obviously looking also at AI, how do we introduce AI into our processes, how do we do more, basically, in a more automated way? And so that's part of it. The other part is very much about the transformation of the business from an organizational point of view. As you know, we are at a time where there's lots of different skill sets that are needed for the business. The business needs to look forward strategically at how we go, how we transform, how we change what we do, what sort of new revenue streams or new products we need to put into the marketplace to satisfy the demands of the consumers out there. So it's very much also looking at how do we transform the business and what do we do next. So one is what do we do now to be better, and the other part is what do we do next. In terms of specific projects, my projects range from at the moment looking at a set of systems. So we've got, for example, some legacy systems that are not utilized in the proper way. We also have a dynamic CRM that is linked to some workflow tools that we have that are London based, and also linked to our SAP HANA, like I mentioned. And we also have a ServiceNow system. And all of those systems need to be harmonized, and there needs to be processes that basically enable the integrity of data, or all of that flow from the moment that we get a contract to the moment that we get the cash for that particular order. And there are gaps in that system. There are gaps in that flow, should we say. There are gaps in processes that are offline, in paper processes, for example. There are gaps in the processes that could be optimized. There are gaps in optimizations. There are gaps in effective use of AI. So we're trying to look at all of that flow and make sure that we have a very optimized, very digitalized process to minimize the effort from the teams that operate those processes, but also to give us that competitive advantage when it comes to the whole flow from order to delivery in terms of speed of delivery, accuracy of delivery, and customer experience overall.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty complex front. So I think I heard you mention a CRM system, SAP HANA upgrade. Did you say ServiceNow?
Yeah, ServiceNow as well, yeah.
ServiceNow, and then AI. So are all those different systems from different software vendors that you're trying to integrate across the business value chain?
Yes, we're trying to integrate them, and we're trying to provide a seamless process of order for the customer internally as well, from an order, from the moment that the customer wants to engage with us and wants to have an order to the moment that we obviously bill the customer and receive the payment from the customer. I think a lot of the gaps are around visibility. A lot of the gaps are around the automation of certain parts of the process. And there's the big elephant in the room, like people for many years have been doing things in paper, and it's very hard for people to do things digitally, and making sure that there's no opportunity for people to sort of go off system and then therefore break the data integrity or the process integrity or the compliance of the whole process.
Wow. Well, there are so many different levels of complexity to unravel there. I want to address it from the project management, which is your forte, in terms of what you're doing. Is each one of those systems, the way you're looking at it, as a project that are sub-projects under a grand master project plan? How is that being managed from a project management approach?
So we've got different portfolios, and the portfolios are there to address a certain business objective, should we say, a certain business case. And under those portfolios, there are different projects that we manage, and the projects could span one system or several systems, depending on what it is. But we do it in a very much of a process point of view. So, we're trying to do A, and we're trying to get to D, for example. What systems that process touch? And that sometimes it could be one system, for example. So you start and end in the same system. Sometimes it could span multiple systems. So we've got, for example, a project at the moment which looks at our contract to order processing. That spans 3 systems, for example. Because obviously you put the order in a CRM system, then you have a workflow that processes that order, and then eventually it ends up in an ERP system where you do the delivery and the fulfillment of that particular order. So that's a little bit more complex. In other cases, there's, for example, a portfolio that we have around optimizing the way that we request information from the customers in order to fulfill their delivery or to fulfill their order, should we say. That is all in one system, which is the CRM system. So that it's a little bit more straightforward. I wouldn't say it's totally straightforward, because they could have a lot of complexity within it, but it is within one system. And from a project management point of view, there's always a program manager and a sponsor that manages the portfolio side of things. And then we will have project managers for the projects, not necessarily a one-to-one, because some projects are bigger, some projects are smaller. So we could have a particular project manager is managing several projects or several work streams in some cases, if they're not big enough to be called a project. Also, we have a European setup. So within a UK operations, we've got also the support from a European team. So if there are systems that are central, for example, or systems that are global, then we also need we need the support of the European teams to be able to make those changes.
Okay, so that's interesting. I was a little bit enamored of the systems aspect of it, but it sounds like, and when I think about it intuitively, it makes much more sense to look at the process that you're trying to achieve than rather than trying to optimize a particular system. And so the idea, what I think I heard you say was you focus on the portfolio, which is focused on a business result, which may span any number of different systems, rather than being system specific. It's process focused.
Correct. Yeah. Everything is value and process focused. So what are we trying to achieve? Are we trying to achieve, for example, part of one of our portfolios is trying to achieve a quicker order to cash process. So we look at how can we do that? Do we need to optimize the process itself? Do we need to optimize the system? Do we need to introduce automation? Do we need to introduce AI driven technology, for example? But obviously we need to do that in a compliant way. So we need to look at all of the different aspects of it, and not just the system. We need to look at the process itself, the operational process, the compliance side of things. It could be some regulations around billing, how we bill our customers on a regular basis. And Konica Minolta business is quite complex in itself, because obviously we do a little bit like utilities billing. We bill print, we bill usage, etc. So obviously we need to have that visibility as well from a customer point of view, and how do we go about capturing that information and then accurately billing the customers through that.
Yep, indeed. So, okay, great. That's a great explanation. I think a great lesson for anybody who's in project management. It really should be focused on the business outcome, which you would think would be intuitive, but sometimes things get focused on other sort of local optima, I guess I would call it. So when you developed that approach over your career, is that something that you learned, or did you have early mentors who said always focus on the process? Is it something that you figured out because you've got enough scars on your back from not doing it that way? How did that develop in your career?
I think it's a mixture of experience and the number of companies that I have been exposed to. So I used to be a consultant for a number of years, and through consultancy, what you do is you get presented with a lot of different business problems, a lot of different industries, and a lot of different approaches from the customers that you work with. And through that, what I found is that everyone has similar problems when it comes to the success of the projects. The similar problems are rooted around not having scope defined well, not having benefits defined at the offset, what you're trying to achieve essentially. And if you look at the business benefit and the outcomes, it's all rooted in what do you want to achieve in the first place? What value do you want to bring to the organization? If you don't understand the value that you're trying to bring, and you don't understand what you're trying to achieve, then your scope is going to be poor, the execution is going to be poor, your success essentially is going to be poor. And so that experience over in a number of years has led me to believe that unless you start with the very basic of what you're trying to achieve and what you want the end state to be in terms of a process and a value proposition, then you're never going to achieve the right result, because it's not going to be successful or as successful as you could be for the business. And also you might take longer doing things, or you might you might be slower to the marketplace, or you might miss out on opportunities along the way. I believe very strongly in agility. You need to be agile and really respond to the market needs, to what your customers are telling you, to what the market is doing, to what's happening around the world. Going back to the sort of VUCA state of the world that we're in, we really need to be able to react. And the way to react is to introduce that agility when it comes to the delivery of projects. So you understand what your North Star is, where you want to go to, and then throughout you pivot always with that North Star in mind.
Indeed. Well, it sounds like you got great experience throughout your career that have led you to that. And hopefully that will be a benefit to our listeners, because it sounds like rather than making the mistakes. So a lot of times, for instance, people say, oh, we're going to upgrade SAP HANA. So everybody's focused on that. And then, you get the SAP consultants in, they're like, yeah, do this, this, and this. And they don't know your business like you know your business. And so that can definitely get things sideways from time to time.
Yeah, and with SAP HANA, it's really interesting. One of the things that people try to do when they upgrade any ERP system, and I've got experience not in just SAP HANA. SAP HANA is my latest one, but I've upgraded Oracle systems, Workday, a number of different systems. They all operate in the same principle, essentially, when it comes to ERP. One of the main mistakes that people do is that they try to not look at their process, so trying to almost put their existing process into an ERP solution through huge amounts of customization, really expensive consultant time, making that process or making the ERP follow their process. When an ERP, especially a big ERP such as SAP or Oracle or Dynamics, whoever you want to work with, they are best in class for processes. Of course, your company is going to have some USPs that you're going to have to customize the ERP for. But your bread and butter, your order to cash processes, your AP processes, etc., they would know best in class because they would have to have a default for their customers, and default tends to be best in class. So I always recommend to my customers that they look at how they can use the native functionality of an ERP without any customizations, and only customize when there is business value for that customization, because it is truly a USP of your business that, for whatever reason, obviously the ERP can't cater for. And then you minimize the customization, you minimize the cost of implementation, and also you minimize the cost of maintenance of that solution going forward. And you really get the most value out of all of this huge investment. An ERP solution is not cheap, so it's a huge investment for the business. So by doing it the way that they would recommend you do it, or any standard process, adapting your processes to their processes in the first place, it changes the mindset of the business. It's a little bit more difficult in terms of a change, but it's definitely worth it in the long run.
Yeah, that's interesting. That is the trade-off, right? Because a lot of times people come in and they'll have their system and it's a legacy system and it works just like they work. And then somebody will come in, Oracle, SAP, Microsoft Dynamics, whoever. And to your point, it can be very expensive. Particularly customization can be very expensive. And so there's that trade-off between trying to do the minimum amount of customization, but then not trying to install a system that makes you work the way the system works rather than the way that you work. And I think one of the things that I've seen, Uwe Goring, who is one of our advisors and is heavily into SAP, the experience is that I think people don't really understand their processes very well, and they maybe don't understand how the systems work very well. And so they get sideways, insisting that it has to be customized when if they understood, which is where operations science comes in, really the basic behavior of the system and how that works in the IT system, they could save themselves a lot of trouble. But it's a constant trade-off to figure out what level of customization is best. I think that's a key challenge.
Yeah, and it is true. You do need to understand the system very well to make sure that you understand what you're doing, basically, what you're going to be changing to, or how to optimize, how to get the most out of your investment in the system. That's why you definitely need someone that understands the system for your rollout, that can understand the pitfalls, the good things about the system, the not so good things about the system, and really guide you through that journey. But it is certainly something that I always recommend to my customers. Just look at what the system does, and only if it doesn't work for you, you enable customization. Otherwise, you end up in a rabbit hole of expensive customizations that really don't have a reason for being, no value.
Right. Yeah. And it might get thrown out years later. The other thing that you said that was interesting was the idea that you worked across numerous businesses, so you've got great experience in different industries, different systems, and people's problems are always the same. It's kind of amusing because when we go to, I worked for Factory Physics for a number of years ago doing consulting and software. Same thing though with the Operations Science Institute. One of the things that we hear across everybody is, oh, well, we're different. And, I guess everybody's the same and that they're different indeed, but that doesn't mean that their problems are different. They're the same. You have relationships between inventory, cycle time, capacity, and variability, and you need to understand those and how it works best in your business. But it is kind of amusing to hear that, oh, we're different, we're really complex, and it's like, yeah, well,
Yeah, that's a common thing that I always hear, especially when I was obviously in consultancy. We are unique. We need this complexity because we are unique. We've got all of these things that are very unique to our company, etc. And no, don't get me wrong, there will be some things that will be unique, like some regulatory requirements, for a particular industry, a certain USP of the company in the way that you work, etc. But the majority of things are just things that have been normalized as being complex in the organization because there's a perception of needing that complexity. So sometimes you need to go back to basics and saying, what are you actually trying to achieve with this particular process? What are you actually trying to achieve with this particular change or this particular feature? Is it something that is a USP to your business or to your industry, in which case absolutely fine. We need to find a way of simplifying it but still obviously implementing it. But the majority of things, like how we build customers, how we collect information from customers, how we process and all that, there's a certain commonality across the businesses. I would say, and that 80-20 rule, 80% of it would be quite common, and we can certainly simplify. And then there'll be that 20% layer, which would be very unique to you, very that the complexity of a particular set of customers, for example, a particular way of working, and that's fine. But if 80% of it is quite simple and straightforward, your business already runs better and is more efficient.
Yeah, indeed. I think that pretty much buttons that one up. I mean, that's just the way it is, and customization is just another. It's another form of variability. And the more variability you have in operations science, the more buffering you need. So you're either going to need more capacity in terms of developers to add the additional customization, or you're going to have to wait longer for it to get done with however much capacity you have. And so the more you can simplify, the better off you are. Love that discussion. Let's talk a little bit about AI. You mentioned AI as a particular system. How are the projects that you're working with now incorporating AI into what they're doing?
I think AI sometimes is a little bit of a buzzword. You're trying to do AI without necessarily understanding what you want AI for. So again, going back to what do you need to do, and is there a solution? Could be AI, could be a different type of solution that basically answers that particular business need. That's how I see AI in all of the projects and portfolios that we manage. Is there a need? Is there something that we need to do that could be done better, faster, more accurately, etc., through the utilization of AI? Is there a particular agent that we need to create to be able to achieve a particular business function or a business value or a business objective? If there is, absolutely, let's utilize the technology to be able to make things easier. We've got a number of systems that already come with AI features enabled, and obviously we review them on a regular basis to make sure that if there is any functionality that we can, any process that we can automate, any functionality that we can enhance through the AI features that come with the system, we obviously implement that. We obviously have it's not quite AI, but I would say robotic automation, RPA, as well, that we utilize quite a lot to automate some tasks that are much more repetitive. So we have a combination of different tools, techniques to make the processes that we have more automated, faster, better, releasing value quicker, etc. But for me, AI needs to have a purpose. We need to have a reason for enabling a certain functionality within our tools. Otherwise, it just doesn't. We just don't need it for the sake of it.
Right. Well, it's like, like you said, with setting up a project. You don't set up a project just because you want a system. You want to set up a project for delivering a business value. That's no different with AI. And there's a whole range of AI enabling technologies. Now, you mentioned, I'm going to drill down a little bit on one of them. You mentioned agents. So are you guys using agents specifically? Is there a specific case that you can describe where you're using an agent maybe to do some work that people were doing before?
Yeah, so we've got, for example, our order processing at the moment. It used to be very manual. So we would get a number of documents that we would need to check, and those documents would need to be checked not only for do we have the document, but accurately, do they have the right sections? Do they have this right signature? Are they signed by the right people, etc.? So we recently implemented automation in that area through agentic AI. So essentially it's an AI agent that looks through the documentation and then makes sure that everything is as it should be. So we've got the right documentation, it's got the right content, etc., and then puts it in different queues. So we still have a human that effectively looks at the exceptions, anything that doesn't look quite right. And obviously we still have the governance at the other end when it comes to the ERP fulfillment, to actually looking through and making sure that we've got all of the documents. But there is a certain amount of processing that was very manual and it wasn't that valuable for the business, because all they did was basically open documents, look at them, say they look fine, and then basically pass them on through the process onto the ERP for them to be processed by whatever business function was processing that particular order. So all of that, we've now implemented some agentic AI to be able to automate that. So now we just need to through the CRM, there's a whole bunch of documents that get uploaded. AI sorts through them, throws out any exceptions or anything that it doesn't look quite right, but anything that looks right, it just sends them onto the ERP to be processed. And that's cut down enormous amounts of time and obviously manual effort by the teams that can spend more time looking at all of the exceptions or doing value-added activities within the business. And another part that we are starting to use AI, although this is still in development, is our tenders. So we've got government tenders, so where we sort of have to answer a certain amount of questions, etc. But that's internal. That's all internal in our system. So we have a huge amount of obviously a library of documentation, of information, etc. Within the company in terms of our processes, ways of working, etc. So we are still implementing some agentic automation to basically sort through all of that library of information, produce drafts for the managers of the tenders that then they can review and adjust and put more information if needed, etc. It's just giving them a starting point instead of a blank piece of paper for answering those questions.
Yeah, those are wonderful examples. I mean, those are great use cases, and at least at the level AI is at right now. I mean, you're not going to have AI, signing contracts and sending out checks, the approval process, unless they're sending checks to you. But the approval process is perfect for that. Same thing we had experience. We're about to publish our new book, Operation Science Applied. And the publisher sent us the new book, and he says, well, you go through page by page, and if there's an error, a typo, you need to just mark that. And I just wrote it back and said, I ran every chapter through AI and said, find me any typos. So I'm hoping that we don't have any typos. But AI wasn't going to write the book for me. And so for us, I should say, me and my co-authors. But it's amazing how much non-value added time it takes out of your day-to-day work. Well, those are great examples. All right, let's talk about, so you mentioned you were a consultant, and then now you moved into working within the company. What did you learn when you moved from being a consultant sort of on the outside to being on the inside, working with the group as an employee?
It's a very good question. What's the difference between being a consultant and being within the company is that when you're a consultant, you give your advice, and to a certain point, you are part of the implementation, but you're not committed to the implementation, because essentially at some point you're going to exit the company. When you're in a company and you're a part of the company, you have a vested interest to make sure that you see the project to completion and that you deliver the benefits outlined. So it's a very different mindset in terms of how you manage the change process. So one is a bit more detached, when you are a consultant, because you don't need to, effectively, you're not part of the company. You don't belong to the company. So even though you obviously do want the best outcomes because it's good for you, it's good for your business, it's good for your reputation, obviously, you're a bit more detached from those outcomes because you're not going to see them through in 5, 10, however many years. When you're part of a company, you feel the culture, you live the culture. So you want to make sure that whatever change you're implementing has a good lasting effect and is properly embedded into the business and delivers the benefits realization that you've outlined at the beginning. So I would say it's much more emotional, the way that you manage change when you're part of the company than when you're a consultant. I think from a professional point of view, you're invested in both, because both you need to make sure that both are successful, but you live and breathe the culture and the effects of that change in the culture when you're in the company much more. And obviously from a progression point of view and the strategy point of view, you also are much more embedded into the strategy and you have much more visibility of like future strategy. So everything that you do also has that lens of, is it going to work? Is it going to align to our future needs and our future strategy?
Yeah, a good analogy of that is, eggs and bacon for breakfast, right? Consultants like the chicken, they're committed, they provide the eggs, but the pig who provides the bacon is really invested. So, when you're employee, yeah, you're completely invested in making sure that whatever you're working on comes to a successful conclusion. And, both have their uses. I mean, as you mentioned, you worked across a lot of different industries. So as a consultant, you do want somebody to come in to give you, that's one of the reasons you hire consultants. You want someone to give you an outside view. And, but they don't have the same commitment that your employees do. Indeed. I think that's a great distinction. So when you come into a new organization, how do you diagnose whether the constraint is technology, process design, decision-making process, or along those lines, leadership alignment? Do you have a lot of political infighting going on? Do you detect that as one of the constraints?
Yeah. I tend to have a very collaborative approach. And my approach is very much, let's listen to people, let's understand where we are, the as is, and then work with the different business functions to understand where the value lies, essentially. So for me, it's very much about that process of spending the time understanding the business and understanding the business challenges and understanding where value gets lost, and then putting that into a well communicated, well thought strategy for the future. I think a lot of the projects or a lot of the initiatives that fall over or don't have the support from the organization are because they're not well communicated, when people don't have the context, they don't have the understanding, and they don't feel involved in the journey. So if you involve people in the journey, you listen to them, you make them understand how you came to those conclusions. You tend to not get into the infighting, to the challenges that you might have otherwise. Don't get me wrong, people are always going to disagree sometimes with your outcomes. They might have reluctance of change. Obviously, there's the curve of change that everyone goes through. But I think very much keeping that dialogue, that open communication, that active listening is really important to be able to still carry those people in the journey. Some will go with you willingly, some you might need to push them a little bit more towards the right outcomes.
Yes, indeed. So a couple of questions along those lines. When you come into an organization and you're listening, which I think is a wonderful first step, where do you start? So if you're going across a number of different functions, I mean, do you like to start with the finance guys, or the operations or the customer service people? Is there a particular function that you look at first? And then the second part of that question is, when you're talking to people, do you have one-on-one conversations, or do you get everybody into a room? Because we found that it's interesting to have everybody in a room where somebody says it's like this, and somebody else says, no, it's not like that. And there's a lot of information to be gained from that. What's your approach for those two things? Who do you talk to first, and then what sort of conversations do you have?
I tend to look at all of the critical business functions. So there would always be in our organization the critical business functions. Typically, there'll be like finance, operations, technology. It depends on how the company is structured. But essentially, looking at those critical operations, then having that sort of overview of how they all interact together and what they deliver for the organization. And then very much having that dialogue about with each of the functional leaders about what are their pain points, what are things that are working, things that are not working, etc. And then drilling down from there, what are the biggest pain point areas. And from those pain point areas, it depends, so there could be a group consultation or a group conversation if it's something that is much more of a wider nature. If it's a particular area very specialized on a couple of individuals, it could just be a conversation with those couple of individuals. But for me, that macro view is really important, and really understanding the products. How do the products essentially go through the whole of the different critical business functions? So if we are selling a particular product, how do we, going from the beginning, how do we take that order? How do we process that order? How do we build that order and get the money for it? Exactly. So so very high level process mapping, just to understand how each of the critical business functions fit into the business. And then from there, it's almost like a heat map approach. Where are the biggest problems? Where are the areas that need more of a focus? What are the areas that are going to release the most value for the organization? Because sometimes there are areas typically that have not had the focus, because they're seen as back office operations, for example. I worked with a company some time ago where there was a huge focus on their systems, on their ERP systems, on their finance systems, their supply chain management, etc. But they had neglected all of the logistics and operations. And when I looked at the logistics part, they hadn't had any investment for number of years. They had outdated processes, inefficient processes, lack of systems. So everything was kind of going okay up until the point that it got to logistics, and it was all falling apart. But the outcome is that in the eyes of everyone else in the company, it was everything before the logistics part that was going wrong, rather than the logistics part. So just by fixing or focusing the investment on the logistics side of things, automation, new systems, new equipment, new health and safety regulations, etc., a number of things that we did in that area, that resolved probably I would say about 40 to 50% of the problems upstream. So then that left me with a much shorter list of problems to fix or problems to focus on upstream, because the root cause was in logistics. The root cause wasn't in the order processing or on the order taking or on the operations upstream.
Yeah, I'm just smiling because I've had that same experience. And one of my takeaways from that, and it sounds a little strict, but it's true. Just don't believe the customer when they tell you what the problems are. You can see that they have a problem, but to your point, they didn't think, logistics, it works fine. We did that for years. I had the exact same thing happen in a plant, and they were saying, quality control, that's fine. And we did everything else, and it was running just perfectly, and things were still not working out. And what we found out was, quality control wasn't fine. They didn't have enough people out there to handle the situation, but they had just said, no, it's fine, don't worry about it. I think that's something, and it's not just for consultants, it's for anybody who's approaching a problem. Certainly you want to have input from people, but you need to look at the operation science to describe how the process is working. And you need to look at the whole thing, because to your point, you can uncover some hidden problems that the organization doesn't even realize is happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember I worked for a company where I was specifically hired to set up a new set of databases, should we say, almost like a data warehouse. When I started looking at what they had, half of the data wasn't even in the systems. The critical operational data was all in paper. They didn't have systems that could handle most of their operations, etc. So I had to kind of go back and say, well, I can't really do a data warehouse for you because the data warehouse is only going to cover 10% of what you do in this business. And actually, it's not going to have any value for you because essentially your critical operations are not digitalized. You need to digitalize those operations. So you've got the data for the data warehouse to then have data feeds to then give you the answers that you need. So sometimes you have to have those difficult conversations because my job it was as a consultant and it is now is very much enabling the organization to release the maximum value out of change. And if I'm very busy building a very expensive data warehouse that has virtually no data, I'm missing the opportunity to really transform the business in a meaningful way, which is really what's going to bring the business up and bring real value to the organization.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, it happens. It's see the same problem over and over again. Definitely. Well, listen. Wow, the time has flown. I can't believe we've been almost 45 minutes. But before we get away, I want to talk a little about Marta Moreira Rodriguez, the woman. Tell me about your childhood. Where'd you grow up? How did you get to be where you are? What was your world like as a child?
So I grew up in Spain, in a region called Galicia, which is the northwest of Spain, a little bit on top of Portugal, if you look at a map. I grew up by the beach, so and I grew up with in a big household with grandparents, parents, cousins, in true sort of Spanish style. We all live very close to each other and have a huge family unit. And I've always wanted to travel, to do different things. So as soon as I graduated from university, I moved to Madrid. So I started working in Madrid in video games, actually. So I started working for Sony PlayStation. So I managed a few video games. And then I got the opportunity to go to London when I was quite early in my career. I was probably 21. And it was a good opportunity because in London, Sony PlayStation had more titles in terms of video games, and it was really, really exciting. Essentially, managing video games is just like managing a very complex project. That's it. You've got different parts of it.
Definitely, yes. So was that a project management role, or were you working on a particular game?
Yeah, I was a producer, so I worked in quite a number of different games. So and obviously I started my career as an assistant producer for video games, and then as I moved on, I became the producer of some video games. So some of them, people would probably know, like I produced Final Fantasy VIII. And I produced some when I was working for Stake. I produced Sega Rally, Gumball, so a few games like that. So it was fun. It was very much fun. But after a while, obviously, video games are the same. So I kind of moved off from video games, and it was the internet revolution. So I I worked for an internet company that unfortunately went bust. They went bankrupt after a few years. It was very much fun. It was a lot of fun, but it was a lot of cutting edge technology, etc. But it was a lot of it was not a lot of financial, should we say, governance in there in that company. And
Yeah. Oh, well, that's a good experience too. I mean, everybody, having failures is part of your career. I mean, I don't know anybody who doesn't have them. So, yeah.
No, but it was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot from that company. I was managing a lot of accounts, and it was a really big education when it came to financial management, commercial management, etc. Because of that, I never had that exposure before. I had a little bit of obviously project budget experience, but not really managing accounts as such. And then from then, I moved on and I started moving more into the transformation space. So looking at bigger project transformations, etc. I started working for Microsoft for a number of years. Worked for Microsoft for a number of years. Started in Xbox because obviously it was aligned to video games, etc. Then moved on to Bing, the search engine, where I managed the image and the video search and that was a lot of fun as well. And then after that, I decided to go to set up as a consultant, and I wanted to experience different industries. I quite like the variability of consultant life, and I did that for quite a number of years, about 7 to 8 years. And then I kind of, going back to the conversation we were having, I kind of missed a little bit the owning the results and really being invested in the company. So I moved on to a permanent role and at a music company in London. I had, again, really good fun. A lot of music type of projects, a lot of data type of projects as well. And so that was fun. And I had to set up the whole project management function there and the delivery function. And that then moved on to financial services. And now I am in a Japanese company, IT company, basically. It's in technology.
Okay. Wow, that sounds like a fascinating career path. So what do you do when you're not working for fun?
I love running. I also love boot camp activities. So for me, it's very much about sports. When I'm not working, it helps me relax. It helps my mental health as well. So I try to be active as much as possible, and I like the sort of the social aspect of it as well. Running with other people, running clubs, etc. And I also love volunteering for the community volunteering. So I am a scout leader. For those, I don't know if you got scouts in a lot of the areas of the world, but I'm a scout leader, and that brings me another aspect, a different aspect, obviously, with the camping, with the leading through the curriculum of the scouts as well. So that's a lot of fun. So yeah, really enjoyed that.
That's awesome. That's definitely project management. Managing a bunch of scouts.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, listen, thank you so much for taking your time. I think it's just been great insight here for anybody who's involved in project management and basically just trying to improve companies. So I greatly appreciate you taking the time, and looking forward to staying in touch, and wish you well in your future endeavors.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. And thanks, everyone.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
The Operations Science Podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. Join the Operations Science Institute at opscience.org. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and see you on the next episode. The views expressed by our guests are their own and do not represent their company's views unless specifically stated as such.